All right, guys, so we will be deriving the quadratic formula from our standard form, which is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Now, the first thing we're going to do, so we're going to complete the square of this. So we're solving for x. That's our idea, okay? So we need to solve for x. We're going to complete the square. What we're going to do first is we're going to move over this c value, because when we complete the square, we want a new c value. So we have ax squared plus bx equals negative c. Now the next thing we're going to do is get rid of this leading coefficient. We do not want them there. So in order to get rid of it, we divide all of the business by a. Okay, so now we have x squared and b over a x equals negative c over a. So now what we're going to do is we are going to complete our square. So remember, that means that we are going to add some number here and add some number here so that we can factor this nice and beautifully. In order to do that, we take our b over a, and we are going to take that number and divide it by 2. Oh, I want a bigger line there. And then square it. Now, when it comes to fractions, technically what this says is we have b over a on top of another fraction, which is really 2 over 1. We don't love to divide fractions by fractions. Instead, what we do, our fraction rules say, we multiply by reciprocals. So we're going to multiply by 1/2. A reciprocal is just a fraction flipped, which cancels this guy out down here. When we multiply by 1/2 on the bottom part of this big fraction that we created right here, we also have to multiply by 1/2 there. So technically, when we divide b over a by 2, we're really multiplying by the reciprocal, or the flipped fraction, and that gives us b over 2a. Now, this is squared still. We haven't actually done that part yet. We are just reducing this. We can't have a fraction inside of a fraction. So in order to solve that, we multiply by the reciprocal. Okay, now remember, this part is important. Okay, so now we're going to square that. Since we have a 2 on the outside, our exponent, we must distribute the squared to the b, the 2, and the a. So we really have b squared over 2 squared times a squared. But 2 squared can be simplified, so we've got b squared over 4a squared. So this is our squared number, which again looks kind of crazy, but we'll be okay. So we're going to take this and add it to both sides. So we have b squared over 4a squared. b squared over 4a squared. Now, the whole reason we did that to complete this square over here is so that we could easily factor it. Now remember, that's why this is important. To easily factor, we take the square root, because this is now a special case. We take the square root of x squared, which is x. We take the middle sign, which is a positive, and we're going to take the square root of this guy. So basically what we had before we squared it, which will be b over 2a. Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's right. Okay, and then that's squared. Okay, and then that equals what the rest of this is. So we have negative c over a, and we have b squared over 4a squared. Great. Okay, so now we need to add these together so that we can then take the square root. Well, fractions can only be added when they have common denominators. So in order to get a, what I need to multiply a by to get it to be 4a squared would be a 4a. That's what it's missing. So I'm going to take my c over a, my negative c over a, and I'm going to multiply it by 4a on the top and 4a on the bottom, which, remember, is like multiplying it by 1, but that helps me change my denominator so I can add my fractions, because we can only combine fractions if they're out of the same whole. So on the top, I multiply, and I have negative 4ac, and then on the bottom, I have 4a squared. So I'm going to take this value and replace it here so that my denominator matches with this guy. Okay? So now we have x plus b over 2a squared equals negative 4ac over 4a squared, and this guy. b squared over 4a squared. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to combine this. And to combine this, since the denominators are the same, I'm just going to combine my fractions. And since I like a positive first, we're going to rewrite it a tiny bit. So now we have x plus b over 2a squared equals, so I'm going to put my b squared first, and then my minus 4ac will come after, and that's all over 4a squared. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take the square root, because again, we're still trying to solve for this x. The square root and the square cancel over here, so now I have x plus b over 2a equals. Now, when you complete the square and you take the square root, or when you take the square root of something, you will have two answers, the positive version and the negative version. Since we're deriving a formula, we're just going to combine those into one. And in order to show that we are combining them into one, we're going to use this symbol. It's a plus minus symbol, and it represents that there's a positive version of the answer and a negative. And we do this when we take the square root of something. So I'm just going to, baby steps. Okay, so we've got b squared minus 4ac over 4a squared. Now, if you notice, the top of our fraction looks kind of bananas. And the bottom of our fraction looks nice, like I could actually square root it. So we're really going to break off this section. We're going to keep our positive negative, but we are really going to keep the top, b squared minus 4ac over the square root of 4a squared. So we're just separating our radical a little bit more. The top we're going to leave the same, plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, because it's a little long, but the bottom is a perfect square. So 4 squared is 2 and a squared is a. So now we have 2a. So let's go back. So I'm taking this whole section and I'm replacing it with what we just did here. Okay, so now we have x plus b over 2a equals plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Notice now our 2a fractions match. So we're going to do the opposite, minus our b over 2a on each side. Okay, so now we have x equals plus minus negative b over 2a. Oh, I guess I should write it the other way. Okay, hold on. We'll do this step next. So x equals negative b over 2a plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So since they have common denominators, we're just going to combine the tops and get rid of the bottom. So here is the quadratic formula in all of its glory. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And this is our quadratic formula that we will know and love a lot. And that is how we got it. Okay, bye guys.